And in a Truth Social post earlier today, President Trump writing that Harvard University should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity. He said that if the school keeps pushing what he called political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired content, these comments come after the Trump administration freezing more than $2 billion in funding for the university over its refusal to implement policy changes. Here's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt earlier responding to questions from reporters.
All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
The federal government announced Monday it was freezing $2.2 billion in grants and $60 million in contracts to Harvard University. This comes after the Ivy League school said it would reject the government's demands for policy changes. Harvard's president Alan Garber wrote Monday the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. The Department of Education's Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism then released a statement announcing the funding freeze. The task force said Harvard's refusal to comply shows a mindset, quote, that federal investment does not come with the responsibility to uphold civil rights laws. Some of the demands the government made to Harvard and several other prestigious schools include eliminating DEI programs, banning masks at campus protests, and limiting the power held by some faculty members. It also mandates that admissions and hiring processes prioritize merit over race and gender-based criteria. In a letter last week, the Trump administration told Harvard to screen out international applicants deemed, quote, hostile to American values or supportive of terrorism. It also demanded an audit of programs at the school's Center for Middle Eastern Studies to root out any faculty who, quote, discriminated against Jewish or Israeli students or incited students to violate Harvard's rules. Garber's response was that no government should dictate what private universities can teach, who they can admit or hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. He said Harvard already made extensive reforms to address anti-Semitism. As early as Friday, the Harvard chapter of the American Association of University Professors filed a lawsuit to block the government from cutting funding, saying a freeze was imminent. Last month, Columbia University received a similar list of demands with nearly $5 billion in funding on the line. Unlike Harvard, it agreed to nearly every demand, though the funds remain frozen at this time.
President Trump says the ball is in China's court, this amid new escalation of trade tensions. He's also signed a memorandum today to stop illegal immigrants from getting Social Security benefits. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao from the White House. Good evening, Iris. So tell us, what's the latest today that you're hearing?
Good evening to you as well, Steve. So as trade tensions continue to rise between China and the U.S., the White House today again sends a message to China today saying that they should come negotiate first as they need the U.S. more than the U.S. needs them. Here's a readout of a statement by President Trump by the White House press secretary today. Watch.
I do have an additional statement that he just shared with me in the Oval Office. The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger. And China wants what we have, what every country wants, what we have, the American consumer. Or to put it another way, they need our money.
And China recently retaliated with a 125% tariffs on U.S. goods after President Trump last week hiked his tariffs to China to 145%. While President Trump has been saying that he's willing to talk to China's Xi Jinping, no official communications between the two leaders have been reported just yet. Meanwhile, this morning in a Truth Social post, President Trump criticized China for, quote, being brutal to American farmers, adding that they also backed out of a deal to buy more Boeing aircraft as part of its latest retaliation efforts. Meanwhile, on domestic policy today, President Trump signed a new presidential memo trying to bar illegal immigrants from getting Social Security benefits. It's also going to expand investigations into fraud amid allegations that some people over 100 years old are still getting those benefits. Here's the White House press secretary stressing that the president will protect the benefits for lawful American citizens who have been paying to those programs. Watch.
He will always protect that program. He campaigned on it, he protected it in his first term, and he's back again to continue protecting it.
And the president today And the president today also signed an executive order seeking to allow Medicare to directly negotiate drug prices. The White House says that will lower drug prices for everyday Americans, especially seniors relying on Medicare. But that action will ultimately require congressional approval. Steve.
Iris, certainly a lot going on today. With regard to the border, what is the latest with the administration's deportation of some of these illegal immigrants amid these legal battles?
Sure. So the case of Gilmar Abrego Garcia is still amidst new controversies. Today, the wife of Abrego Garcia came out to call on the Trump administration to facilitate her husband's return, saying that accusing both the Trump administration and administration of El Salvador of playing politics. Yesterday, both Trump and the president of El Salvador agreed that they're not going to return Abrego Garcia. Here's what Garcia's wife was saying today. Watch.
She had been here leading our Easter prayers. Instead, I find myself pleading with the Trump administration and the Bukele administration to stop playing political games.
Meanwhile, White House officials today doubled down on their position that they're not going to return Garcia, as they emphasize that he is a member of the MS-13 gang, according to court filings and evidence, as saying this. Watch.
Based on the sensationalism of many of the people in this room, you would think we deported a candidate for Father of the Year.
If you ask me if I'm in favor of returning terrorists to the United States that are gang members, I'm not in favor of that at all.
The White House today also told us that the president is looking into laws that could actually allow him to deport American citizens who are the most severe offenders of the most heinous crimes to Central American prisons. Back to you.
Certainly a multifaceted issue. Appreciate you bringing us all different dimensions, entities. Iris Tao, live at the White House. Thank you, Iris. Former President Biden today returning to the spotlight for the first time since leaving office. The 82-year-old speaking at a conference in Chicago, zooming in on issues like Social Security and what he calls rights for people with disabilities.
73 million Americans receive Social Security. From their first paycheck for their entire life, they pay into Social Security. And in return, they count on Social Security to be for them when they're going to need it. Folks, must never, ever betray that trust or turn our backs on that obligation.
Today marks the 85th day since President Biden left the Oval Office. The conference is billed as his first post-presidency speech. However, former President Biden did deliver remarks at two recent events with less publicity. Biden is joined by former Maryland Governor and Social Security Administrator Martin O'Malley, as well as two sitting United States senators. And to discuss the administration blocking funding to universities and Democrats' immigration message, we're happy to have on with us Democratic strategist Josh Lafazan and Republican strategist Chet Love to break it down. Josh Lafazan, Chet Love, great to have you both with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Now, the Trump administration has frozen over $2 billion in multi-year grants and contracts to Harvard University. This after its leadership refused to eliminate DEI programs, adopt merit-based hiring, as well as a few other stipulations, amending admission reforms and so on and so forth. Josh, is this the right move for the university to be pushing back against the current administration?
Sure. Well, Steve, I have an interesting perspective here because I am Jewish and I graduated from Harvard, right? So I think two things can be true at the same time in this discussion. And the first one is that Harvard has not done enough to stem the tide of anti-Semitism on campus. And this was never about free speech. It was about the incidents of harassing Jewish students, disrupting classes, canceling speakers. All of these were outside of the student code of conduct, and none of it's acceptable. So yes, given the fact that Harvard takes in more than $9 billion in federal aid, the Trump administration is entitled under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to take action. But I also, secondly, I think that using federal funds as a cudgel to demand changes within an academic institution is a slippery slope, right? Given that a Democratic president might make very different demands of a school in a red state, and schools go from learning institutions to political pawns. And I also respect, of course, the institutional integrity in schools determining, what they can research and what they can teach. So in my opinion, the better option here is for the federal government just to take away the university's tax-exempt status, tax their endowments, and make all private colleges truly private. Harvard took in $151 million in foreign donations, already had a $58 billion endowment, has drastically hiked administrator salaries, all while sticking students with the bigger bill. And the question is, what part of forcing an 18-year-old to pay $100,000 a year makes this a nonprofit? So to me, that's the root of the problem, and I believe the solution here as well.
Chet, your thoughts on stripping nonprofit status versus removing and taking away the federal funding? What gives more leverage, and what do you see as the proper course forward?
I agree with what Josh was saying in terms of institutions of higher learning need to be focused on those things. We need to have students who are spending their time focusing on studies to innovate new technologies that address issues like climate change, to find ways to be more productive in society, to reduce our national debt. These are the things that we should ultimately be focusing on and encouraging more and more students.
Switching gears here just a little bit, Democratic lawmakers saying that they're willing to travel to El Salvador, this to advocate for the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was deported. He is accused of being an MS-13 gang member. Now, Democratic Congressman Richie Torres says he's introducing the Rescue Act, which would require the U.S. to respond after El Salvador's president said he's not going to be returning Garcia to the United States. Josh, where do you see this going, and is this all a sort of political gesture, or does it carry any weight?
No, I think this fight is just beginning, and I assume my colleague and I will disagree here, and that's okay. But to many Democrats I speak to, they see this as very clear as the Trump administration openly defying a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling, and that means that we're in a constitutional crisis, plain and simple, right? Because for many people, and I want to make sure I preface here, this is not about immigration, right? Framing this as those who oppose Garcia's deportation or somehow in support of illegal immigration is asinine and it's preposterous, right? I'm a Democrat who, as you know, was harsh on Biden for not doing enough to close the border, and I've applauded President Trump's administration for reducing those border crossings to virtually zero. This is not about illegal immigration. This has everything to do with the rule of law. And the case is very simple. A Maryland man was accidentally deported to a supermax prison with the most heinous criminals on earth in El Salvador. The Trump administration admits they accidentally deported him. They say they have the power to deport him, but they don't have the responsibility to bring him back. And for those who are saying that it's not in the Constitution where the president has to listen to the Supreme Court, it's Article 2, Section 3, which mandates that the president shall take care and the laws be faithfully executed. And in my opinion, as a Democrat, I think this is where Democrats are focusing their efforts. Democrats are using this as an example of Trump defying the Constitution. If he doesn't listen to the Supreme Court, I think Democrats will introduce articles of impeachment. But no, I don't think this fight is going away. I only think it's going to escalate.
Chet, how do you respond to this? And maybe if you could, shed some light or your thoughts on the fact, Josh is mentioning that this is a constitutional crisis, but at the same time, you have the issue of El Salvador's own sovereignty and unwillingness themselves to release their citizen.
Absolutely. So number one, there is no constitutional crisis. The Constitution is working. And there is a rule of law here. The Supreme Court did come down with the ruling, and they issued the ruling to go back to the trial court for further amendment. That's been done. And there's a process that's ongoing. The Trump administration is working with the judiciary in terms of resolving this specific issue. And again, I want to highlight this is just one issue of many. And again, President Trump was elected into office, and the American people support the work that he's doing to enforce immigration laws, which my colleague has even acknowledged. And so are there going to be mistakes that happen along the way? Absolutely, there are going to be. And so the goal really, I think, for this administration, and what I strongly encourage them to do, is that when we make mistakes, quickly admit the mistakes, and then work to rectify those issues.
Josh, another immigration-related case, you have the Palestinian activist involved in the Columbia University protest, which was taken into federal custody on Monday, this after arriving at a citizenship interview in the state of Vermont. Josh, do Democrats risk undermining their immigration message by championing these cases that involve national security concern?
Absolutely. You know, it's Democrats should make clear that we support the rule of law, but choosing to get behind somebody like Mahmoud Khalil, who this is not about freedom of speech. And again, I think Republicans were correct here. This is about somebody who caused havoc on a college campus. There was a janitor who was held hostage, right? Breaking property of an institution, threatening Jewish students. None of that is freedom of speech. And certainly, and this is where most of the country is, and I am, right? You have a right to free speech in this country, but being on a student visa, you're here. It's a privilege to be here, and you should be here to study. So I make this point that Democrats risk muddying our message. Democrats should be, in my opinion, saying that this is not a Democrat or Republican fight or an open borders or closed border fight. It's about the rule of law, and most people like me are in the middle. Right? We want violent criminals deported. We want U.S. Customs and Border Protection to have an increased headcount. We want the southern borders sealed up. And most of us also have a reverence for the Constitution and the rule of law. So Khalil is a bad example. But I'd say to my colleagues who say, well, you know, illegal immigrants don't have due process, it was Justice Antonin Scalia, who's probably the most conservative justice of the last century, who wrote, quote, "It is well established that the Fifth Amendment entitles illegal immigrants to due process of law in deportation proceedings." So in my opinion, Khalil and these folks who are violating law, violating the student conduct, they should go. And Democrats who are rallying behind him, I think, are risking not only our party's perception of moderation, but our party's perception on immigration. However, I think that the media is unfairly putting this as a Democrat or Republican and ignoring the nuance, which is why I like coming on this show. You guys seem to be one of the only outlets that's interested in the nuance and balance of the issue, so I appreciate that.
Chet, what does Republican messaging look around some of these deportations that we're seeing play out?
I think the most important thing that you're hearing in this conversation today is that there are ways to have bipartisan alignment on a lot of these issues. And I think that's really the most important thing for your viewers here to take away, which is it doesn't have to be a red or a blue thing. It can really be a purple thing. And so what I really hope around the messaging on this is that we avoid the xenophobic rhetoric, we avoid those conversations, and we simply talk about rule of law and protecting Americans. At the end of the day, the Trump administration's priorities have been to get rid of these violent gang members who have illegally crossed into this country, who are terrorizing communities, and everyone, I believe, across this country can support those ideas.
Josh Lafazan, Chet Love, really appreciate both of your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.